Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Deepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name's Andy Littleton, and I'm here with Eric Deepen from the Village. I'm from Mission Church, and we're sitting with Clarence Presley and Andy Seitzma. So who are they? They work with Resonate and the Christian Reformed Church's Mission Wing with me, and they're in town for a few days. And so we threw them into this room. They had no idea what was happening. We have explored things about their ministry context in Houston, Seattle. We talked about Tucson. We talked about spiritual warfare. It's good stuff.
I really liked the political conversation.
And the
I think
conversation.
There was some really rich stuff there.
Absolutely. So there you go. Hope you enjoy.
Thanks, guys.
You might not be happy with how your voice sounds.
Exactly.
Welcome to my life. I'm always nasally.
Can I just get a single, let's see.
Check. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check.
Lead over it. Okay, I'm going to have you intro this.
Oh.
Yeah, you did intro.
Well, the good news is intro's at the end.
Yeah.
So we will, at the end, I will record an intro because that way I can allude to what we've said. So we're going to kind of just jump in. So, hey, what's up? Andy and Clarence, you two look like deer in the headlights. You have no idea what's going on here because you just flew in from Seattle and Houston, respectively. Andy, congrats on the Astros win over there.
Thank you.
And we threw you in a podcast, and you have no idea what's going on. I can see the look in your eyes. It's great. This is a real Faith Over Breakfast. And we just ate a burrito.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So guess what? We have guests. We already introed it.
We do have
you
guests.
Know that. Yeah. So, guys, welcome to our breakfast table.
Maybe we should go around and introduce our guests.
No, I don't think so. No. We did that in the intro. Remember?
Oh, right.
We just they just heard that.
So Andy, you're from Houston.
Yes.
What do you do in Houston?
I'm a pastor and do work with mission stuff with Resonate.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So Andy is the reason the Christian Reformed Church has doubled in size in Houston, Texas. He's a huge connector, activator of others. There's all these church planners and people in Houston who he has seriously he has paved the way for, has empowered, has brought it's pretty cool to see. It's actually really cool to see.
I'm looking forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, no, it's a really beautiful thing.
And Clarence, you're the godfather of everything. Is that how that works?
Ooh.
I don't know if I'm the godfather.
Not the godfather.
I'm not sure.
Maybe
a capo. Maybe a capo. Yeah, I still have to answer to the boss.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, but I get a chance to work with all these cool people all over the West Coast and from Washington to Texas, and it's a treat. It's a blessing just to get a chance to observe all the work that everyone's doing, joining God on mission.
That's really cool. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been in this role for about 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Clarence also has a church in Seattle and is a big football guy. Activated. There's a league that has been, you were a part of, helping get going. Your son is about to go play for Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
So there's a lot of football in the story, but also that's been a way of engaging your community, right? Something to that effect?
Yeah, so we started a football league in my church about...
Inside the church?
Yeah, literally. We used to play 2-in-touch in the sanctuary.
Sweet.
Just tackle it. Then we went
bad
to tackle.
Bad sermon.
Horrible
Watch out.
sermon. Watch out, man.
Yeah.
Looking for my lead blockers. Like, where are they? But seriously, we launched a football league for youth in the Seattle area that grew between 2 counties that served nearly between 6,000 to 8,000 people.
Okay.
And it's still going. They just had their championship yesterday. I transitioned out of that about 2019.
Okay.
And handed it off to a couple other folks. I pastor a little church in Tukwila, Washington. So right when you land in Seattle at SeaTac, you're flying over our building. But, we are shifting. We're becoming micro church network because of gentrification. Our people are all over
Right.
2 counties. And so we're just paying attention to how the Holy Spirit is leading us in this season.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I've stayed in hotels next to the airport in Seattle, so
You're close, man.
I was close.
Did you feel the anointing?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get a sweet rest.
It was thick. Yeah.
No bed bugs. So
No
it was,
bed bugs.
so it was a sweet rest.
You have to
And that's-
rebuke those bed
That's
bugs.
an anointing right there. Man, yeah.
Oh, my
you got
goodness.
to. We rebuke them every time. We got bed bugs at our house. Little known fact.
Yeah, so did we.
Yeah, and we now rebuke them by never being able to bring our luggage in the house. We have to vacuum it all before we go in. 'Cause, I mean, we all care, but my wife is really not wanting to go through that again. Yeah. Anyway,
Wow.
whew.
Well,
That could be a
we got
podcast.
ours from a kid whose mother, she drug addict, all that. So he was at our house all the time, but their house was terribly filthy, and so
Yeah,
he
right.
brought the bed bugs. But we didn't know for like 3 months,
Well,
so
right.
they were just building up and building up. Oh my gosh, it took us a year to kill those guys.
Man, and we don't know exactly where ours came. We just looked at all the potential
Right.
pathways that usually you get it from hotels or something like that, or sitting at some strange church in Arizona in their podcast room.
Yeah.
But did I just say that out loud? But the anyway. Yeah, don't get bed bugs. Hey, here's a 1-800-BED-BUG. If you want to give them a call, they'll help you out. They're one of our sponsors. And
1-800-BED-BUG. Okay, so I got a question
bed
because
bugs.
today,
That's enough number.
you don't want to talk about this, but today is election day.
That's right.
And you guys are in 2 very different cultures.
Ooh,
and so I'm kind of
Texas.
curious
Oh, yeah.
what it's like in your church, what the temperature is, how you guys talk about politics. I'd be very interested.
Well played. Put it back on them. I like it.
Yeah, so we're in Texas, so
Yeah.
red state, and although we're also in Houston, and Houston is really mixed that way. So, it's not our church is probably majority Republican, more conservative that way. But we have just a lot of networks and good friends in a lot of Hispanic churches and African American churches, and so politics really crosses a lot of lines for different reasons.
Yeah.
And just over the years, we've just, you can't assume anything. And,
Right.
And so there's some people in our church who are still really, they'll be really strong one way. But that posture doesn't really go over that well.
Okay.
So I think there's just a lot of, there's more empathy and love across lines to say, well, why do you feel that way, or why do you vote that way? With some people.
I was going to say, man, that's
Yeah.
the most encouraging thing I've heard in a while. So,
there's others, and they're just die hard, and so
Is there any keys that you've found to pastoring people in such a diverse space?
I mean, you just got to walk with people, right? And just the empathy and listening, and I don't know if there's a real key, but you got to know the story and why people value what they do, and so then vote the way they do, and so forth. So
Yeah.
right.
yeah.
How about Seattle?
Ooh.
Man,
Woohoo.
Seattle is a juggernaut.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think overall Seattle is probably more liberal. Our church is probably more conservative.
Yeah.
Eastern Washington is conservative in a lot of the counties.
Okay.
Right.
But
Okay.
Seattle metropolis is
Yeah.
predominantly liberal. I think for us, it's not been very difficult to navigate because we don't push politics over the pulpit.
Right.
So what I often share, since we planted the church over 21 years ago, is vote your conviction, right? I consider myself in extreme middle.
Okay.
Like I'm not neither Republican or Democrat. So it's going to always be my conviction. And so someone say you're independent, but that doesn't mean I'm voting independent.
Sure.
Okay.
Again, it aligns with what my conviction is. The policies, and I think that we have to do a better job of encouraging people to read policies and how it impacts them.
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes it's kind of default. If you grew up being a Republican, you're going to automatically check Republican. If you grew up
Correct.
being a Democrat, then that's what you're going to do, instead of really seeing how it impacts the community. And so I think we've had the luxury of just having folks, and we have some folks that are in city government that we've just really encouraged them, like, vote your conviction. Let's talk about it. Like Andy said, we want to be good listeners. We want to have a posture of listening. And we want to have a posture of listening with prayer. So, Lord, how do we pray? What are you calling us to do with this? How do we walk in this, even if the decision doesn't go your way? Right? So we say it around the table when people are having meetings with Robert's rules, but when it comes to politics, we're like, we want to fight each other and beat each other up. Like, well, you got another 4 years or whatever the time is for you to readjust, but how do you still love those who maybe had a different view than you and walk with them? So that's been our position.
I like that. Oh, that's really cool.
One thing that's helped me is one of my really good friends. He's an African-American pastor in a Baptist church right next door. And we've been doing stuff in the community together for over a dozen years. And we're really good friends. And so we have coffee and we talk. And I'd heard someone say years ago that, like, white evangelical Christians will vote Republican for moral issues.
Right.
But African-American evangelical Christians will vote Democrat for justice issues.
Right.
And so, just having that in the back of my mind and talking and listening, and there's actually some truth to that. So, when it, like what Clarence is saying, if you zero in on the policies and what's being voted on, it's hard to just kind of vote one party. Mm-hmm. You want to know who's voting or who's standing for what and what the issues are, how that impacts. Personally, I've actually been drawn to the American Solidarity Party lately. It's not a very well-known.
Well,
never heard of it. Do tell. This is breaking news on Faith Over Breakfast.
Yeah. So, it's not a very big party, but what it is, it's Republicans who've gotten disenchanted with the Republican machine, and they're still voting more conservative for moral issues, but drawn to a lot of the things that party stands for that would cross over with Democrats for, serving the poor better or climate change or more justice issues.
Right.
And on the other side, there's Democrats that are jumping ship, coming on board because those things still matter to them, but like some of the moral issues they're concerned about that don't align in the Democratic Party.
Right.
So if you just vote one party ticket, it doesn't always align biblically with what our issues should be as Christians. So it's not a simple thing to say, hey, it's Tuesday, vote. It's like, well, what are the issues?
Right.
And what does Christ call us to do?
And we're here to announce that Andy Seitzman is running for president under the ASP.
And we'll get no votes.
I mean, the election's almost over. Yeah. But if you want to write somebody in,
go ahead and fill him in.
Fill him in.
Fill him in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Andy, just about the whole understanding the idea of the justice and the moral. And what I've come to realize is when we look at it from a biblical position, especially that, as one of my friends called, the second table of the loving your neighbor as yourself, really walking in one another's shoes, I think oftentimes the tension comes because we really don't understand how it affects other folks, right? So usually the impact is based on people's felt needs and their real experiences, right? So you're going to see a lot of in the ethnic minority communities, the justice issues, because they feel that every single day, right? You're going to see that probably more in mainline or predominantly white communities, oftentimes because maybe they don't feel that, but they've been raised with a certain moral or ethical position. And so now you're talking about generations, and I'm going to honor my grandfather and my mom and my dad, and just understanding how it impacts, and morals are important to all of us, right? But we have to have conversations, and I think that's where the struggle is. We consider conversations when people have debates. That's not a conversation, right? Their whole point is to get their point across and to tell you the other person's wrong without giving each other an opportunity to hear one another. So that's one of the things that we really try to focus in on in our community. Like, man, when's the last time you sat down and had a conversation with someone who had a different view than you? And it's important to do that. Even it doesn't mean it's going to change your mind.
No.
And I think people have to understand that. No one is saying, hey, go do this so you can change your mind. No, really, go have those conversations so you can better understand. Right. The Bible says in all that getting, get an understanding. So we need to get an understanding when we're having these conversations with other folks So we're actually coming in willing to listen versus let me come in so I can get my point across. And I think that's kind of a lot of what I see. I told our folks a couple of weeks ago, that's kind of how we do prayer too. Like we want to give God a laundry list, but we don't shut up long enough to hear what has God got to say to us.
Right.
You know, be still and know that he is God.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I like that. Preach it, man. That's really good. Yeah, I think one of the things for us is we end up in our community having some relatively active people on opposite ends like that. So for us, it's a huge stressor on what does it look like to see each other as image bearers of Christ, like as the primary, and what does Christ think about them? That's how I have to enter in with them, and then I can have a conversation. And that's hard. I feel like, I mean, we lost a number of people over the last few years because of just trying to wrestle through some of those things.
That's been a hard. We did too, as you know. And I think that churches like ours. So I mean, you guys are with Resonate, which is connected to the Christian Reformed Church, which we sort of are too. I mean, our church is CRC. Yours is CRC adjacent. But the difference.
I'm CRC.
You are you are so CRC.
Thank you.
But our churches are not made up of CRC people. So when we talk to people in kind of the denominational circles, it's like apples and oranges. So our church is a hodgepodge of people from all sorts of different Christian backgrounds, and then a bunch of people that are, don't have a ton of religious background. And so there isn't this like common language. Even when you talk about kind of God's will for politics, I realized, man, we have these different ingrained definitions of how that should work, and we are not on the same page. And that was tough to do.
Yeah, that's
and
a lot of conversation.
I was almost jealous in that moment of churches where the people had grown up in the same tradition.
Right.
Because that might have been easier. But I mean, it's valuable work. It's just tough. So I don't know. Do you see that here at the Village as well?
Diversity?
Well, yeah. But I'm saying the believers here even having different frameworks for.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It was just even the Roe versus Wade being overturned was quite a stir in our church.
Yes.
That we had to kind of walk through with people.
People excited and devastated. So did we.
Yeah.
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 So
That's very real.
It is very real.
Yeah. Well, hey, we've pummeled you guys for a second. Do you want to pummel us? Got anything?
Well, you're asking, like what do you think of our church or neighborhood? I'm not even sure I know the questions to ask yet. We just landed here 45 minutes ago. So,
Oh wow.
But
like,
maybe,
where are we? What's happening? Are there snakes? I mean, whatever questions you've got, man.
yeah, maybe tell us a bit more about your context here in Tucson, and then also a little bit about the history of maybe your two local churches and what brings you here and what makes you guys tick as pastors and as churches.
Yeah, let's have a debate about the context of Tucson. You say what it is, I'll say what I think it is, and then we'll fight each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when we started playing the Village with Rod in 2001, there was a news report, and they said that there were 400 churches in Tucson for 1 million people. Of course, they were not including the Catholic community in that. They were talking about evangelical churches. But still, the number that I heard was if every church building had two services, 10% of Tucson could go to church. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was part of. So it's a very unchurched in a way, with a large Catholic community, and I would say some more either very staunchly traditional Catholic and connected to the Hispanic community, or very evangelical Catholic. So we have some very evangelistic priests in town. So, but it is a very, very dark place. It's where all the witches come. If there's sacrifices that happen, animal sacrifices happen up on the mountain, all that kind of stuff. Enough that I have been in, dealing with demons and that thing over 20 years. So it's, I've gotten to see some things that before I became a pastor, I was like, I'll do anything, go anywhere, as long as I don't have to deal with demons. That was my, God was like, okay, well, I'll fake you out. I won't let you have to do that for a few years. But no. So I think that it's very dark, and it also has a very isolationist kind of environment. So if you drive around, you will notice lots of gated communities, lots of fences. People don't like to have you come knock on their door. But Tucsonans will come out for an issue. It's like something big. Everyone will go out and protest it, but then they all go back to their homes. It's not a long running activism. So it's just kind of a short fuse. You do your thing, you scream and yell, and then you go back in and don't connect with people. You also come to Tucson because you are running away from something. So like the average stay is like 3 years. And one of the things I still hear is I've been in Tucson for 3 or 4 years and I have no friends. Like that is a very, very common thing. People are very, very lonely. We have like the most psychologists and counselors per capita in the United States. So there's a lot of mental illness. And since we are a slow grow or anti-growth city, we don't have freeways, which is nice. We have that small town feel, but it isolates people even more.
Well over 1 million people, one highway that kind of skirts the outskirts of town.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can be like, oh, well, you live 30 minutes away. I may never see you. Like, because I don't really live in the same town you live in. And that has been until, even with the pastors, a lot of isolation, feeling disconnected. I mean, until like the Gospel Coalition, at least in the Reformed world, we were all pretty isolated from each other.
Yeah.
So I think even, people who come to Christ in our community, it is a slow process. It is a big, at least for us, it's like a long belong, and then, okay, I'm going to embrace Jesus. And then it's, I think, a long burn on, I need to change my behavior. I think it's been a big process for us.
Wow.
So
interesting.
So that's kind of the dynamic. At least that's how I've experienced.
Yeah, I completely disagree. I think it's... Well, no, just kidding. It's funny because this question... So when he mentioned the Gospel Coalition, that's a group of pastors we've gathered kind of under the banner of we kind of years ago, I guess I declared that there's a Gospel Coalition group because I was part of one in Phoenix. And that label helped people understand that it was generally Reformed, but there was room for other people. So not everybody in that group would go, I'm a member of the Gospel Coalition. But for some reason, that label helped people understand the general flavor of the thing. And it's a really good group of pastors that we are hanging out with here. There's like 45 on the list now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And usually 25, 30 are together once a month, which is a new thing.
Right, because I think some of the more gathering of pastors was very political.
It was political or issue based,
Yeah.
and this is more relationship based. Yeah. It's about knowing each other and just hearing from each other and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's been really good. It's funny. So in that group one time we talked about Tucson. I don't know if you remember this. I think you were there. Because there were just the people gave their different versions. So this one guy goes, "Oh, everybody in Tucson, it's the garage door. They go in their garage door, they close the garage door." Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Yeah, that's because you grew up in the suburbs. Like, honestly, you grew up rich. Like, I grew up in the trailer park. There were no garage doors. We all ran around and played under the bushes, and so it depends on your experience of Tucson. There are people that I think I interact with that just love Tucson, that would say like there's space for everybody. There's space to talk about faith. It's a more welcoming community. When my family came here, we felt like it was people were very distant from each other. But I hear people who say like, "Oh, finally I'm in Tucson." People wave at you. They say hi. And so Tucson's, I would say, I described it to people as like a donut in a donut hole. Like the donut hole in the center is pretty liberal and honestly a little more like connected to one another and like to some degree, but there is still some connected for now, and then I'm going to go home and leave me alone. And then the outer perimeter is way more conservative, usually from somewhere else. That liberal core, there's more long timers, in that liberal core, I think.
Sure.
And then there's that, it feels like maybe the suburban donut is like people who've just moved here, usually for the base or Raytheon missile systems or something like that. And they're, got a good job, kind of only going into the city for a beer. But then there's actually a perimeter around that. That's kind of the rural little tentacles. And that some of those people are more long-term and
sure
aren't really too pumped that Tucson's big and stuff like that now. So,
I mean, I think the thing, though, that kind of will give you the nature of it is when we planted the church, there were a lot of other church plants. There's only one that I know of that's left.
Many haven't made it.
Yeah. This is where you go to die as a church planter.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to plant a church.
So why do you guys think that is?
Well, one thing that I noticed was people were trying to bring models of things here, and it just in general, this is a broad generalization, but Tucson doesn't like other people's stuff. And so I'm a baseball guy, so one of my examples of this is we had a hometown AAA team called the Toros, and it was ours, and it was our way. And then the Diamondbacks came to Phoenix, and they thought, oh, Tucson's going to want the AAA team for the Diamondbacks. They brought it here. It failed miserably. I didn't like it. None of us liked it. Like 5 people liked it because it wasn't ours. It was a big city Phoenix thing that got kind of like shoved on us, and our thing got taken away. So there's a lot of bitterness. There's that story. Like actually a ton of people my age, if you bring up the Toros, it's just like pain. But I think churches behaved the same way. And we actually thought about this when we planted. It's like, oh, we're going to start an Acts 29 church here, or we're going to do the Baptist plant here, or we're going to do the whatever plant. And generally Tucsonans are like, we're not really looking for that your thing here. Like Hillsong tried to plant here, failed miserably and fast. And that's the one that you'd expect, like they can do it anywhere. Failed. And I've just seen it over and over again. And it's like Tucson wants things that belong to it. So I always get a question as a pastor. People will go, "You from here?" And for me, my family moved here when I was 6, but we're from a small mining town. My dad's family's from a small mining town outside of Tucson that Tucsonans like. It's one of our favorite getaways. So I always go like, "Yeah, I moved here when I was 6, but we were coming back because my dad's family's from Bisbee." And they go, "Oh, okay," like
stamp of approval,
accepted. Yeah. But when it's, I've moved here from Sacramento and starting a thing with the church planning network, people are just like eyes glaze over and go, okay, see you later.
Well, I also think the Christian community, I mean, I grew up in this city, and it's very isolated and very well connected, and it moves from church to church.
There's like clumps that move around. Yeah.
And
which I hate.
And so it's
like musical chairs type of deal.
It
happens.
It is. And it has to do with whoever this preacher is or whatever the youth ministry is, and it's not very missional at all. I don't think we have a missional characteristic as overall evangelical churches in Tucson.
There's this kind of cadre of longtime Christians that all know each other in Tucson. It feels small. You can kind of like I could probably name off people, and so could you right now. And many of them have been in different churches when those churches were the thing, when the big preacher was there, and then the big preacher moves and they move, and a couple of those have been a little more stable over the years, but that I'm not really too personally interested in like reaching that group. They're reached. They're Christians. They're just kind of bouncing around. We didn't plant our church for them, frankly.
So what is the percentage you would guess of people moving into Tucson?
Well, we had the big boom. We had a bunch of New York, LA, all that. We had a big growth boom mid and post COVID. So that's happened.
Yeah, it's
slowed down.
I haven't heard the numbers. I know Phoenix is 300 people a day.
Yeah. Are
moving to Phoenix. But I don't know what it's like in Tucson.
I mean, I don't have numbers on it. I just, I've got a retail store, and I'm constantly meeting people who are new to Tucson looking for stuff for their house. And I tend to ask them where, and they're usually coming from a bigger metropolitan area. They want a city that doesn't feel as stifling. Tucson's a solid option, and it's more affordable.
Yeah, and I would say when we started, we were much poorer. and the people that came into our community were much poorer. And I would say that the same type of people are coming in, but they're not with the same economic problems that we were facing early in maybe the first 10 years. There seems to be more money in the city than there used to be.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So I don't
remote work is a major, because we don't have too many industries here. You were at IBM, Raytheon, the Air Force Base, which is, we have a huge Air Force base. We have more airplanes.
University.
We have more airplanes in Tucson, Arizona than any country has in their military in the world. We have more planes than any world power has in their entire military in Tucson. So that's a big thing.
Yeah, you should drive them out to the graveyard.
We could cruise by the graveyard. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. They're putting a big wall around it, so you can't see it all.
No.
It's still, you got to look at it from Google Earth. It's wild.
Yeah, I was asking that question because I was telling these guys when we came in, polar opposites, obviously, but it kind of reminded me when I came here of Bozeman, Montana, which I just went to visit in June, but different. Like that's more snow and green, and here it's more desert, but the mountains and the flatness, college town, and some of the same things in Bozeman. There's this local group that really don't want new stuff, new people coming in, but it's happening, right? Change is inevitable. Partially because people want to live in Bozeman, Yellowstone, the university. Yeah. You would consider it conservative, but it's becoming kind of more liberal because of the professors there, right? And so when I come here, I'm looking and I'm wondering after I hear your story about, if you're not from here, and I can probably see that because that's kind of the group there, but I'm wondering if there's something bubbling up with all these. You have a university here.
Yeah.
Right. You have people moving here. Is there another population in the underbelly of Tucson that may be growing for ministry to begin to just come gather around?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you mentioned Bozeman because we have a couple that's really involved in our church has moved here from Bozeman, and they liked Tucson. They were looking around at places to move where they could spend a little more time outdoors and stuff like that. And Tucson was close enough, similar to Bozeman in ways that they liked. And then we have been seeing at our church, I don't know about you, but we're getting some of those out of town people. So in a way we wanted to be this kind of Tucson thing, but we've been embraced by people who've moved here from, Bozeman, Philadelphia, various places. And I'm going, okay, that's cool. But there definitely is a huge need to kind of connect those folks. And I think Tucson's torn on that, right? Because it's good to have people with money here, and everybody knows that helps.
Sure.
And I don't think people are against. I don't think Tucsonans are against outsiders coming in. They just want outsiders who like what Tucson is and don't want to change it. So, if when people come and they want to see 5 new freeways come in, it's like, well, no, don't do that to Tucson. That's not Tucson. That's not us.
Right.
But if they come in and go like, we want to see more local distilleries, and like, oh, sweet, okay, you're fine, as long as you value what we value, get on the bus.
Yeah. So do what we do.
If you're down to like kind of participate with our vibe, then that's fine. And so I feel like Tucson is pretty welcoming when Tucson embraces those who embrace it, I guess. Yeah. If that's, again, broad generalization. But,
I have a different question for Eric.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the witches and the sacrifice and the demon. So I wonder how much spiritual warfare does churches face here and probably don't realize is even
a lot
spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
And has there been any conversations or galvanizing to really begin to warn the spirit against some of the principalities and the things that you guys may be facing?
So I would say that in our church, yes, but I would say no, at least in my connection with other pastors, they're not engaging it as much as I would expect.
Right.
For a long time, we would go, Rod and I, and then I would go by myself. We would go up to the spot where So Rod, you know Rod, right? So you've met him at least. He has the gift of discerning spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually just trust him on this process.
Right.
And so the way that there in time, he and I would spend these just hours and hours in prayer together. It's definitely the first 10 years. I'd say sometimes it was just once a week, all day. He and I would sit in my little shed. I had remodeled it, and we would just pray. And what we kind of discerned was that there was this very large, slow-moving spirit that sits on the top of this mountain and kind of overlooks. And so we would go up there, and we would pray over that spot, and we would command him to leave and do all of the things that he would do. And we had a young woman in our church who was the daughter of a high-up person in the satanic world inside of a church. Attend a church regularly.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah.
That was my first experience of really she was a follower of Jesus, but she certainly had tons of spirits attached to her, and there were lots of ritualistic sacrifices and things that happened in her childhood and abuse. And she lived with me for 8 years as we walked through that process. Once she had been delivered, and then she lived with me, and then she actually had some issues that happened, but she's doing well now and is married and has a baby. But yeah, so that was my first introduction to that, and I have learned, I mean, especially in the younger population with what's happening in the gender issues, we work, I mean, that's part of the people that we care for in our community. So there's a definite darkness and spiritual thing that's going on. And what I have learned is that fasting and prayer is what works. And fasting and prayer as a community, understanding the battle that we are facing together, and understanding that even my own sin can create holes in like my own unconfessed secret sin can create a vulnerability for others. And so really helping our community understand that they are standing together against darkness.
Right.
It's a big part of it. So, and then you get mixed up in ministry and you forget sometimes. It's very easy to forget.
Yeah.
The enemy likes that.
The confusion and the busyness.
Yes.
It just makes me wonder about the network with the 45 leaders that you all have. Have you guys discussed these things? Have you talked about coming together?
It's a good idea.
That's a good idea.
It's the group that, in a way, is least inclined to do it, but I actually think they would. I'm just saying it's not the natural bent of this group to go into spiritual warfare conversation, but I don't think any of them would deny it. I think they would have the conversation. It's just not.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea.
Look at this. This is happening live on the air.
Yeah, the conversation.
Note taken.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Because
I'm
a movie guy, a TV guy, and my wife used to have me watching this show called Vampire Diaries.
Oh, okay.
And this makes me wonder,
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm not saying vampires, but, a community, like the community these vampires are in, it was like this safe little town. Who would have ever thought all this was going on? Right up under their noses. But there were folks who knew.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of one of those things like, and I think every city has a dynamic of spiritual warfare, especially in Seattle. We have a huge history, in our region.
Well, we are twins. So, I mean, I vacationed for a very long time in Seattle. And I would run into people who were from Tucson. That's just back and forth between these two cities is very common.
Yeah, the snowbirds.
We just had people from our church move to Seattle.
Really?
There's a lot of affinity between the two. Like, there's a relatable culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you talked about the isolation, Seattle's definitely individualism, right? And it's kind of in its history.
Yeah.
Right? From going up to the gold rush in the Yukon, and the people that settled there, some of the folks that were running because they were outlaws, and
that's like the corners of the western United States, especially, are kind of where people ran for a new life.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Tucson, we're not quite San Diego, but it's we're in that zone.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, even just understanding how to do ministry was I ended up by chance at a young leaders conference in 1999 with Mark Driscoll and Doug Padgett and the whole clan. And I met all of them before nobody knew who they were. And that was transformative for me in understanding what it looked like to be missional and how you go about that process and seeing it happen. To have it demonstrated for me, it's like, oh, okay, like now I know what to do a little bit with all of these kids that I can't find a church for, and because I was in college ministry and all that kind of stuff, and finding like people just didn't fit and I couldn't find space. And so that was partly why we started the Village. It was like, I need a place for these people
Yeah.
who've never been to church and who are kind of goth-like and kind of dark, and then the music does not fit what they're experiencing in church or what they would experience, and the ignorance of Jesus. Like even in the late 90s, people were saying, I can remember many questions of like, so Jesus and God are connected? What happens in church? I've never been.
Right.
Oh, and the U of A women's basketball team, they lost somebody, and the funeral was at the church that I was running the college ministry for, and they were all sitting in the front. And one of the girl basketball players leaned forward as the guy's preaching and said, who is Jesus? So there's that's when I started thinking, and so we are in a post-Christian.
On Barna's poll, and we're near Seattle on that, the gate, what they call the post-Christian list or whatever, which simply means that there's a large number of people here who did not grow up under the influence of Christianity. They don't have the furniture of Christianity is not in their mind. It's not part of their operating system. So it doesn't mean that they've rejected it necessarily. It's just not. It's not there. And I meet a lot of folks who are in that boat as well. Who are going like, the very basic questions here. And they're not ignorant folks. They're very smart folks, but they didn't grow up on Christianity,
which is a great opportunity in many ways.
Oh, right? I actually kind of prefer talking to those folks. It is like, because a lot of the baggage isn't there too. Like some of the furniture isn't there, but some of the baggage isn't there. Yeah. But it's a different thing to do. It's complicated. Yeah. On the spiritual note, I grew up Pentecostal, so I kind of went running from some of the weirdness that I experienced there. And so I have to be, I ease back into some of these things, right? But a thing I have noticed is just a lot of people that we've engaged with in the last couple of years are reporting having like deep spiritual experiences, prior to trying church. And I mean, either when there's drug use involved a lot of times, or like, I mean, one of the converts we've had recently at our church within the last couple of years was pointed to us by, I believe, as a tarot card reader, told her Jesus was calling her. And when
did she go to that reading?
Huh?
When did she go to that reading? Do you know?
I could kind of get a close number. I'd have to look at it.
Because we had a tarot card reader in our church who then took like all these Bible verses.
Oh, you were telling me
tarot
about
card deck and would go to tarot card like readings, but it would just read verses and people would have, and then she would tell them what God wanted for them out of the scripture that was laid out.
Who knows, man?
that was the thing.
She's moved away, but it seemed to be quite a profound and real. I mean, she had that experience, walked into our church at the suggestion of a friend, and then had a lady in our church, just explain the basics of Jesus to her, and she kind of had heard some of it in her life, but it became real. But the tarot card reader, right? And then more recently, the second most recent convert, this is just within the past 2 months, it was while in something of a state of like a drug encounter, had a very profound and like clear voice from God and listened to it, which is pretty Interesting, right?
Yeah.
And then so that's but I would say these are spiritual encounters. There's like a darkness and light collision that does seem to be happening in the lives of people, and so that's and
Well, I think this is a good podcast. We could keep talking, but we could probably wrap it up.
Time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, hey, Andy and Clarence, good to have you in Tucson. Enjoy the 80s, the weather out there, and
Absolutely.
hope you have a good time.
Thanks for having us.
So if you've got any questions for us, or if there's a topic you're hoping for, you know the email address, faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. If you'd like to send a $5,000 gift, go ahead and send that over to Eric Siepen at the Village Church.
You can donate right there on
Just
the
but or $5 works too, or you can just rate us, or hey, just thanks for listening. We'll take whatever we can get from you all, so we appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in.
You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.